بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك، سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, I would like to welcome you, all of those who are here and those who might come subsequently to this lecture as part of Zaytuna College's Black History Lecture Series. We have a wonderful, wonderful program in store for you tonight. Our very own Dr. Abdullah Ali, who will be talking about themes related to his dissertation. He will be introduced by the person I will introduce, so I will refrain from any further comments or accolades in that regard. So we like to bring before you, first of all, we'd be remiss if we didn't open the program by a few verses from the Book of Allah, the Quran, recited by Zaytuna College's very own Yusuf Sayal. Yusuf is a senior here at the college, moving rapidly towards graduation, completion of his tenure here from my home state, the wonderful, beautiful state of Connecticut, hailing from Bridgeport, Connecticut, a place that used to scare a lot of people. But Yusuf went there and he calmed things down with his calm, pleasant demeanor. So without further ado, I would like to bring before Yusuf Sayal. He would recite a few verses from the Quran and then translate them into English, and then we will proceed with our program. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you very much. Yusuf, tafaddal. Mashkuran ghayra ma'mur.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا ولما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبكم وإن تطيعوا الله ورسوله لا يلتكم من أعمالكم شيئا إن الله غفور رحيم. إنما المؤمنون الذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله ثم لم يرتابوا وجاهدوا بأموالهم وأنفسهم في سبيل الله أولئك هم الصادقون. So in the name of God, the loving, the compassionate, O mankind, we have created you from a male and a female and made you into nations and tribes, so that you may know one another. Verily, the most honorable of you with God is that who has God consciousness. Verily, God is all-knowing, well acquainted. The Bedouins say, we believe. Say, you believe not, but you only say, we have surrendered, for faith has not yet entered into your hearts. But if you obey God and his messenger, he will not decrease anything in reward for your deeds. Verily, God is oft forgiving, most merciful. Only those are the believers who have believed in God and his messenger, and afterward doubt not, but strive with their wealth and their lives for the cause of God. Those, they are the truthful. Sadaqallahu al-Azim.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we thank Yusuf for that beautiful recitation. This time we'd like to bring before you Kristen George. Kristen is a doctoral candidate in the sociology department at the University of California, Berkeley. She's also, and her work is very relevant to our topic in a certain sense. So she's doing work on the abolition of slavery here in the United States, the Protestant church during the 19th century, and race and gender in Islam. She will be discussant with Dr. Abdullah after his presentation, and she will introduce him. So at this time, ladies and gentlemen, all concerned, without further ado, we bring before you Kristen George. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Imam Zaid, for that introduction, and thank you everyone for coming this evening. I am now going to introduce our speaker this evening. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali is a faculty member here at Zaytuna College, whom I'm sure most of you are acquainted with. He teaches courses in Islamic law and the prophetic tradition. He also coordinates Zaytuna's Islamic law program and serves as an integral part of its Living Links honors program. He is a lifelong student of the Islamic tradition. He was born to Muslim parents and began a serious study of Islam in his early teens. He attended Temple University for 2 years prior to pursuing studies that culminated in a 4-year collegiate license from the prestigious Al-Qarawiyyin University in Fez, Morocco. He holds a BA from Al-Qarawiyyin and in Islamic law, and an MA in ethics and social theory, and a PhD in cultural and historical studies in religion from the Graduate Theological Union here in Berkeley, California. He teaches courses in the prophetic tradition, in commercial law, family law, inheritance law, and jurisprudential principles. So without further ado, Sheikh Abdullah, please come in.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Peace be unto everybody, and welcome tonight. I really appreciate all of you coming out and also tuning in for those who are watching online. And today I've been given this particular task, a somewhat enormous task, to speak about an issue which is a little bit sensitive, but it pertains to my doctoral dissertation, which is entitled The Negro and Afro-Arabian Muslim Consciousness. And so earlier today, what I've been doing in my office was sort of trying to pick out from my dissertation some selected excerpts from it and try to summarize the most salient aspects of the research to give everyone an overview of what the actual writing is about before we actually move on to a conversation. So originally I also wanted to just do an extemporaneous talk, but then I said, well, probably would be better if I just simply read at least this summary of this particular topic. So I begin. Beyond phenotypic differences and similarities between various peoples, race exists not as a term of essential biological distinction, but one used to express a sociological phenomenon. The particular phenomenon under question is that of group identity and how it is formed vis-a-vis the other. Pre-modern societies were very insular and were largely defined by their shared languages, customs, and beliefs. Xenophobia was common and directed towards all outsiders unless by a certain shared principle the outsider was capable of achieving incorporation into the group. For Arabs, for instance, being born to an Arab father or acquiring fluency in the Arabic language and Arab custom made the Arabization process easy for non-Arabians. In other words, it was not color or shared phenotypic characteristics which determined authentic Arabness as perceived by many modern people. In later times, however, with the onset of the European Enlightenment and modernity, group identity started to be determined primarily by phenotypic differences like color, hair texture, and the shape of the nose and lips. This is not to suggest that pre-modern peoples did not have some minimalistic conception of race types, for they surely were familiar with the Noachian doctrine, which alleged that all the earth's living inhabitants were the offspring of one of Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. No one can be certain, but perhaps a recollection of the doctrine of humanity's shared Adamic roots helped obviate the development of any significant early color-based prejudice. If we can view race as this process of group identity formation, it would mean that it is far more an experience rather than an expression of genetic uniformity. This is precisely the way that many anthropologists and contemporary scientists view race, as a largely sociological phenomenon rather than a biological fact. The pre-modern experience of race allowed for a greater inclusion of people of diverse phenotypes than the modern experience, which restricts alikeness to skin color. This would make blackness and whiteness, according to the definition of race, as a group identity formed in the crucible of the collective or shared experiences of a people vis-a-vis another's, nothing more than illusory and mere convenient classifications. Even the Arab perception of ethnic purity, as they delighted in the knowledge of their paternal roots and ancestral achievements, was derided by Ibn Khaldun, who said, lineage is an illusory matter which has no reality. النسب أمر وهمي لا حقيقة له. The boundaries of both blackness and whiteness have shifted from time and place in the past, and today not very much has changed in that regard. What has remained consistent for millennia, however, is the disdain for dark skin. According to certain linguists, in practically every language, there exist metaphors of black negative and white positive. The etiology of the linguistic phenomenon is difficult to determine, but there appears to be a perennial disdain for blackness in particular and darker skin more generally. Is this problem particular to a certain ethnic demographic, or is it a more general human challenge? I believe the problem is a ubiquitous one. I have chosen, however, to focus on one manifestation of this in the Muslim tradition, that is, the Maliki school and the larger Islamic tradition. This dissertation offers an explanation of why indigenous black Africans were not alienated from Islam despite the existence of alleged prophetic traditions and legal teachings in the Maliki School of Law which disparage and discriminate against black Africans. It asserts that while color-based prejudice is fairly recent in human history, black antipathy, on the other hand, is a perennial phenomenon. The equatorial and sub-Saharan Bantu-speaking cannibalistic black has been caricatured by a number of ancient writers as the prototypical savage. This dissertation asserts that it is from this caricature that the concept of the Negro was formulated. The fact that pre-modern cultures largely identified as cultural rather than biological races, unlike what is often the case today, made it easier for most Africans to dispense with black disapprobation, which sometimes manifested itself in Muslim society and Islamic literature. The title of my doctoral dissertation is The Negro in Afro-Arabian Muslim Consciousness. The assertion is that the Negro and the African are not completely conterminous from the standpoint of anthropological classification. Certainly, the term Negro has been utilized in America to refer to any person discovered as possessing any degree of sub-Saharan black African heritage. We know, however, that the Sahara is merely a part of the African continent, and its surrounding inhabitants represent only a portion of its people. In addition, for the early Arabs and other Muslims, both the idea of a continent and one bordering Arabia called Africa would have been unfamiliar territory. The only Africa that any of them would have been familiar with would have been Ifriqiya, that is the northwestern sector comprised of Libya, Algeria, and Tunisia, a name popularized during the Roman Empire's rule of that region. The term Negro is believed to have come into English during the transatlantic slave trade as a convenient way to describe, quote-unquote, uncivilized sub-Saharan blacks, especially those who were enslaved. The Arabic English lexicographers Hans Wehr and J.G. Hava both translate the Arabic word zanj as Negro. The word zanj was used by medieval Arabs as a general reference to East Africans near the Horn of Africa, and more specifically for Bantu-speaking cannibals, originally from the region of Zanzibar. This is despite the fact that the term's history extends well beyond the creation of the English word Negro. So to consider them to be perfect synonyms appears to be inappropriately retroactive and anachronistic. There is, however, good reason to consider this translation to be fitting. From Arabic lexicographers, we learn that the zanj, the word for Negro, live near or below the equator. Secondly, we know that they have black skin. Then a third note about the zanj is that they are not the, but a group of blacks, which underscores the fact that pre-modern anthropologists did not view all blacks in homogeneous terms. This is important for our discussion, since as already suggested, the zanj may have been black, but not all blacks were affiliated with the zanj. On the other hand, the Oxford English Dictionary defines the Negro as a member of a dark-skinned group of peoples originally native to sub-Saharan Africa. This primary definition of the Negro corresponds with the Arabic zanj in that the Negro is, 1, a person with black skin, and 2, a person who originates from sub-Saharan Africa. Perhaps one subtle distinction which can be made is that in terms of latitude, the zanj is a sub-equatorial person, while the Negro is characterized merely as sub-Saharan. Despite this subtlety, both the sub-Sahara and equatorial regions are known to be lands inhabited by blacks, which would strongly suggest translational equivalency between the two terms, zanj and Negro, especially since, as certain Arabic lexicographers highlight, that some hold that the zanj region extends from Ethiopia and parts of the Nile in the east to the Maghreb on the western coast. Another important point is that realities precede their designations. That the word Negro was adopted during the transatlantic slave trade does not necessitate that the concept of the uncivilized black did not exist in other cultures prior to that period. This is no more the case than the tenuous notion that just because ancient people did not have a concept of continent, that the landmass we describe today as Africa did not exist. For there are countless words in various languages invented to describe a variety of objects, inventions, discoveries, concepts, and phenomena which already existed in the lives and minds of people. So to argue that words like city, stone, wheat, horse, or wisdom are English words whose pronunciation differs greatly from their synonyms in other languages, or that they were simply borrowed from them in a certain century, would be to suggest that the history of a concept or phenomenon begins with the invention of its popular designation. Even the racialized terms white, black, and Arab are utilized throughout this dissertation, have been in constant flux over the centuries. In addition, the fact that Negro lost many of its more negative connotations during 20th century America does not prove that it was not originally utilized to describe a stark-naked, cannibalistic human being from East Africa. According to historian John G. Jackson, in the literature on Africa, Africans are commonly identified in two groups, one progressive, the other backward. The progressive peoples are called Hamites, Cushites, Moors, etc., whereas the backward ones are called Negroes. Black has not always been beautiful in African American circles, but even before the term African American became the most common designation for formerly enslaved peoples of African descent, they, that is we, were commonly referred to and self-referentially as Negroes. The 20th century African American activist Richard B. Moore, in his The Name Negro, Its Origin and Its Evil Use, fiercely advocated for relinquishing the use of the term Negro and adopting the designation Afro or African American. Moore did not appreciate the fact that the term connoted unequal civil status, being that the only difference between a nigger and a Negro was that one was a slave and the other was supposedly free. Both, unfortunately, still suffered the stigma of subhuman status and or second, third, or even fourth class citizenship. In addition, Moore felt that by prefixing American with Afro or African would serve as a type of psychocultural equalizer, and as much that others who immigrated to America also sported a hyphenated identity based upon land, culture, and history. On the other hand, the African-American historian Carter G. Woodson, who actually is, in many ways, the founder of Black History Month, he was the one who actually had the first. He's having the Negro History Week, which should be celebrated during the second week of February because of Lincoln's birthday and also Frederick Douglass's birthday. But according to Carter G. Woodson, who wrote in his The Miseducation of the Negro, he says, "It does not matter so much what the thing is called as what the thing is." So he's objecting to Richard B. Moore's insistence on changing Negro to something different. So he continues, he says, "The Negro would not cease to be what he is by calling him something else. But if he will struggle and make something of himself and contribute to modern culture, the world will learn to look upon him as an American rather than as one of an undeveloped element of the population." He further says, "There is nothing to be gained by running away from the name. The names of practically all races and nations at times have connoted insignificance and low social status. Angles and Saxons, once the slaves of Romans, experienced this. And even the name of the Greek for a while meant no more than this to these conquerors of the world. The people who bore these names, however, have made them grand and illustrious. The Negro must learn to do the same." Islam's expansion into Africa beginning during the 7th century brought with it the cultural influence of Arabia upon the lives of the indigenous populations. Arabs did not only conquer and migrate with their families, they intermarried with the local tribespeople, as was already normative prior to Islam, and naturally produced offspring. It is to these I refer as Afro-Arabians. For the purpose of this dissertation, the designation Afro-Arabian applies to any person of Arab heritage born and raised in Africa, even with only a tenuous connection to Arabia, those of mixed heritage, or any indigenous person who appropriated Arab culture. I include them all under the designation Afro-Arabian or Afro-Arabian Muslim. It is typically from the works of such scholars whose comments about blackness that I examine. Sharia is fundamentally the moral code introduced by the Prophet Muhammad of Arabia over 1400 years ago. It is the law as revealed to him by Allah, God. Since not every law is clear, scholarly interpretation has augmented and expanded the meaning of Sharia to include the jurisprudence codified and preserved in various legal schools. In the Sunni tradition, there are 4 leading legal schools or schools of thought: the Hanafi school, the Maliki school, the Shafi'i school, and the Hanbali school. With the patronage of dynastic rule over the centuries, these schools crystallized and became preeminent, especially once appropriated by the local rulers. Consequently, cultures formed surrounding the teachings of each school in the various regions of Muslim social interaction. And since pre-modern modes of transportation limited the possibilities for regular intercultural exchange between peoples, they were left to imagine themselves as occupying worlds, though ideologically distinct, that accurately reconstituted the reality of socio-religious existence during the prophetic era. In other words, if a region was governed by the Hanafi or Maliki schools, for instance, in the minds of the masses, they were not merely following a school of thought. They were, in fact, following the Sharia. Having studied in North Africa myself in the country of Morocco, I have received considerable grounding in the Maliki school of law, since it is the official school of the kingdom and most Muslim countries in North and West Africa. I am also reasonably versed in the laws of the other 3 surviving Sunni schools. Interestingly, while perusing the major law works of the other schools, I have not as easily been able to locate the sort of disparaging comments found about blacks that I found amongst particular scholars of the Maliki school. Maybe the reason was that the other schools were encountering largely non-black cultures, while the Maliki school flourished in areas predominated by blacks. Or maybe the silence about the derogatoriness of blackness was negligible, since those cultures operated on the presumption of that notion. Whatever the case, we find that most indigenous Africans follow the Maliki school, and one might reasonably assume that Africans, or any people for that matter, would steer clear of a school whose doctrines explicitly endorse an inferior role and consideration for the black African. I do not think I need to speak more of the paradox of this situation. Notwithstanding the difficulty in identifying similar patterns in other schools, in the prophetic tradition, there exists a sufficient number of anti-black hadiths, though largely deemed apocryphal. During the prophetic era, the universality of Islam was underscored through the inclusion of 4 personalities in the inner circle of the Prophet Muhammad: Bilal the Ethiopian, Salman the Persian, Abdullah the Jew, and Suhaib the Greek. Today, many have begun to challenge Muslim claims of Islam's racial egalitarianism in light of more and more scholars unearthing a culture of bigotry among some of Islam's noted theologians and jurists, along with proof of mistreatment and prejudicial dealings toward indigenous Muslim Africans during the prophetic era and after the Arab incursion into the African continent. Malcolm X's experiences have been useful for the image of Arabs particularly, especially in light of constant Pan-Africanist assertions that Arabs played a pivotal role in the transatlantic slave trade. As my research reveals, it was to the black-skinned, Bantu-speaking, bare-skinned, cannibalistic East African of the Sub-Sahara that most medieval writers referred when remarking disparagingly about blacks. It is they who represent the prototypical, stereotypical Negro. A major goal of this dissertation was to present the argument particularly to uncritical Muslim readers and teachers of the Islamic tradition, that cultural bias at times has influenced saintly personalities' interpretation of the revealed law. This was the case with major authorities in the Maliki legal school, which was adopted in North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Andalus. Therefore, it is important to understand the perils of encouraging blind, uncritical acceptance of scholarly spiritual authority. The dissertation focuses on the sources that reinforce black antipathy in the general Islamic tradition, things such as marital undesirability, presumed dysmorphia, and animalistic impulse, and in the Maliki school, more specifically, things such as unequal social protections for black, quote-unquote, black women seeking marriage, along with reactions from black African scholars living during and after the European Age of Enlightenment. Through a text-based study of indigenous African reactions to the trend of anti-black Malikism and other aspects of the Muslim legacy which devalue black existence, I will complicate a popular assumption that the Maliki school, which has attracted indigenous blacks, is free of teachings which devalue human beings on the basis of color. I will contend that African Muslims did not view themselves as a racially homogeneous collective, the very thing which made it possible for so many of them to embrace Malikism and dispense with black disapprobation. The Maliki school is one of 4 surviving Sunni legal schools, which originally split into 4 sectors: Medina, Egypt, Iraq, and the Maghreb, including Andalus. And they split into those sectors after the death of its 8th century eponym, Imam Malik ibn Anas. Malik was known as the scholar of Medina, to whom students and scholars from the surrounding metropolises and towns would travel to earn the privilege of his tutelage. In light of a very long career in teaching, a number of his foreign students, upon returning to their homelands, would possess conflicting reports concerning his views on a number of issues. Consequently, representation of his actual views would at times be difficult to ascertain. For most Maliki scholars, however, wherever discrepancies persisted, the most authoritative views would be those of Egypt, and most importantly, what was transmitted by his senior student, Abdurrahman ibn Qasim. Certain Egyptian Sufi scholars of Azhar University during the centuries of the European Enlightenment are extremely important for the current discussion. That they lived during this period is not meant to imply that this was a very time in Muslim history wherein negativity about black skin color or nature was ever heard. For we will see that black antipathy found its way into the general Muslim tradition as well as others. Rather, the point is that from among the many Maliki jurists and theologians, it appears that from these issue some of the most explicit devaluations of blacks or the Negro. Sheikh Ahmed ibn Muhammad as-Sawi suggests a transhistorical presumption of black or brown being the color of slaves. The Maliki Sufi scholar Ibrahim ibn Mar'i al-Shubrakhiti reduces beauty and ugliness of people to the single factors of either whiteness or blackness of skin tone. And regarding the rights of marriage guardians for women, the major jurists of the Maliki school legitimize a double standard for the ignoble or black woman, thereby denying the said woman the protections given to a woman of noble status, a situation which results in hindering her clansmen from being able to safeguard her from the potential harms of suitors of whom they disapprove. The justificatory logic of the said jurist is that the black and or ignoble woman is undesirable. She is therefore without value and compatible with any male suitor. It must be understood, though, that the black woman is only one from a general class of women deemed to be undesirable in marriage. Undesirability results from lacking beauty, wealth, lineage, or celebrated roots, as when one's father was known for piety and magnanimity. Maliki scholars include in this category the manumit and the unappealing non-Arab convert. The point of singling out the black woman in this discussion is merely to highlight how her undesirability in the school is determined according to the leading authorities by the single factor of color as opposed to the other woman? Why not underscore the presumed whiteness of the Musalmaniya, or the non-Arab convert, and make that a sufficient basis for undesirability or ugliness, as was the case with the black woman? Due to the aforesaid bases of undesirability, the normal order of priority given to marriage guardians may be bypassed, and even a non-relative guardian may perform her marriage in the presence of a blood relative. On the other hand, a number of Malikis challenged this rule, insisting that no distinction should be made between a noble and ignoble, or Sharifa and Daniya, regarding the matter of guardianship. So one should be careful not to assume that all Malikis endorse this bias. In light of this amazing phenomenon, I was led to pose the following questions. How have black Africans been able to keep faith in a moral code they believe to be inspired by God, which degrades and maligns them simply due to complexion? Did they simply ignore the disparaging claims against them as nothing more than the personal bias of bigoted jurists? Or did they define their collective identities in such a way that allowed them to exclude themselves from black membership? Or maybe in matters of law, they relied more upon the writings of local indigenous African scholars who excised those offensive teachings from their specific legal texts. In my research, I have found some evidence of African resistance to the offensive suggestions about them, but also of attempts by some to disassociate themselves from any African or black origins. There also exist non-canonical traditions in the Islamic archives that portray Africans as accepting and reinforcing their inferior status and beauty when compared with whites or those of lighter complexion. So I guess what I end with is just to highlight the point that while many of these things sound, I guess just like controversial, and they are controversial and perhaps can make many of us feel uneasy, that we can't lose sight of the fact that ideas about race have been in flux for a very long time. And most of our ideas about race are largely socially constructed. Black doesn't mean the same thing today in America as it means in Brazil, or as it means even in Haiti. I can go to Haiti and I'm not black anymore, or Brazil, I'm not black anymore. Imam Zayd's not black in Brazil, right? Or if you go to the Muslim world, the same thing. Even today, sometimes African Americans, they find themselves in conversations with some who are from the Caribbean or perhaps even from the African continent, and are really sometimes taken aback, I guess you would say, when they discover that they don't have the same fire for the cause as African Americans would want them to have. And I say that largely because they had a different experience. Their experience is different. Their race is an expression largely about an experience, a sort of a collective sense of identity that results from an experience that all of us have had vis-a-vis another group of people. So I think that's probably a good place to sort of pause and then move on to our conversation. So hopefully a bit of clarity, a bit more clarity can be given to what we've already heard, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.